seen, and then frankly some politicians took advantage of the paranoia, I think it caused people to pull back. You will remember that there were a whole set of private companies who stepped forward and said, oh, we're really concerned about what we're being asked by the government to do. In some ways, honestly, this is a bit disingenuous. Google, Facebook have loads of information on people, and they use much of that information for commercial purposes. So it was a little bit, don't look at me, look at the government. Nevertheless, I do think it's important that the NSA come out and explain things like why it needs to build a vast new server farm in the middle of America so that people, you know, what you don't know worries you. And so the more transparent I think these agencies can be, the better off we're going to be.
The Snowden revelations have hurt the tech companies, especially overseas, in the businesses. Aren't they shy of anything hinting of cooperation and collaboration with government agencies as a result?
Well, you know, I think it's obviously true that certain countries have used Edward Snowden's revelations to punish commercial interests of American companies, but in my opinion, that is all an excuse. China was well on the way to limiting Google's ability to maneuver in China for many reasons. A, because the Chinese government wants their own Chinese competitor to Google to succeed. B, because they do not want their people to have access to the kind of open information and platform that Google provides. And so this was an easy excuse. It was an easy excuse for the Chinese, for the Russians, and others to say, oh my heavens, we're horrified. Oh my goodness, we're horrified that this is going on. Let us now punish these companies. It would have happened anyway. This just gave them an excuse, which is why Edward Snowden did not serve this country.
Do you think that some American businesses have been derelict, not addressing the cybersecurity threat they face?
Well, I do think that, first of all, I think companies know. Most of these companies know, whether it's the telecommunications companies like Verizon or AT&T, or it's companies like Google and Facebook. Most of these companies understand that there is some degree of collaboration and cooperation that is required. You'll remember when the Sony hacking scandal hit, clearly something driven by the government of North Korea. You'll remember that Sony was sort of, yes, they were caught flat-footed in many regards, but I recall a press conference that President Obama held where he said, I wish Sony had called me. Well, the truth is there are certain things that a company cannot do unless the government is willing to work with them and vice versa. And so I think it would be useful for both the tech companies involved and the government agencies that are involved to be willing to have an open and transparent conversation with the American people.
Excuse me, sir. Why don't you write down the question on the card? We'll be happy to consider.
President Cisco has a public record.
We're taking questions by card. Why don't you fill it out? We'll see if we can get them. We have a lot of other ones. One of them is around the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is parts of it are about to expire. Where do you stand on that issue?
So, you know, one of the things that I think always happens in Washington, and it's not a good thing, is we tend to boil the ocean over every problem. It's what the political process does. We boil the ocean. What I mean by boil the ocean is we create pieces of legislation because they're written by so many people, lobbyists trying to protect their interests. We create these pieces of legislation that are so complicated that nobody can understand them. Nobody can read them. Nobody knows what they mean. And the same thing is true of the Patriot Act. So in a lot of these cases, we need to go back and talk in plain English, in common sense, about what the problem is and what we need to do to try and solve the problem. If you think about the debate that goes on in the Patriot Act a lot, you have people pulling snippets from this boil the ocean bill and saying, this part makes me really nervous, that part makes me really nervous. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, we are now 14 years past 9/11. We know a lot more today than we did 14 years ago. Let's take a pause and talk in plain English and common sense about what we need to do. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I also think that we need to be realistic, that we need agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency, like the National Security Agency, like the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need these agencies to be watchful and mindful that there are lots of people out there who are trying to do us harm every day. And what we learned in 9/11 is that it is not about discrete pieces of information. It is about a pattern of information that reveals a imminent threat.
We have a question from Brad Cook from Manchester, who asked, how can we increase defense spending and balance the budget as our debt and deficit is the greatest threat to U.S. security?
Well, it's a great question. And look, there's only two things that can be done to lower debts and deficits. No matter how many speeches politicians give, there are only two things that can be done. We have to grow our economy and decrease spending. That's it. That's it. Grow the economy and decrease spending. The good news is that if we decrease government spending by limiting the complexity and the boil the ocean approach to everything, we actually help grow the economy. One of the reasons the economy really is puttering along at such a subpar performance, 2%, 0.2% in the last quarter alone, is because of the weight of complexity that the government has put on this economy. So every government agency has been growing bigger and bigger for 40 years, and all that money turns into complexity. I have met so many New Hampshireites who have told me, you know, I'm a small business owner, and my accountant can't figure out how to do my taxes anymore. And so guess what? We're now destroying more businesses, and we're creating for the first time in U.S. history. If you're big, if you're powerful, if you're wealthy, you're well-connected, you're okay, because you can hire accountants and lawyers and lobbyists. But if you're small, if you're powerless, you are getting crushed. And so all of this complexity is a huge problem. If we cut back on it, we cut back on spending. However, the reason I say we have to go to zero-based budgeting is because you can't reprioritize investment unless you know how your money is being spent. And we don't have a clue how our money is being spent. So we have to see it. And then we have to prioritize it. And by the way, I think we ought to stop talking about revenue-neutral tax reform and start talking about revenue-reducing tax reform, because the government spends too much money.
This one doesn't have a name on it, but it touches on a subject we haven't dealt with today. Given that the current open southern border, how can we feel safe knowing terrorists can simply walk into the country? What do you propose to do to secure the borders beyond Gomez paywall?
So here you go. This is a classic example of government not doing the basics. Of course we have to secure the border. And the border hasn't been secure in a long time. And it is true that our enemies know we have a porous border. We ought to be securing the northern border and the southern border. Remember the story about the Canadians trying to come in? I mean, of course our enemies understand this. And yes, it will take manpower, and it will take material, and it will take money, but mostly I think what it takes is political will. When government doesn't do the basics, when government won't secure a border, when government won't give a fighting soldier in Afghanistan enough blankets, what is it that people conclude? Their faith in their country and in their government is shattered, and that is corrosive. And it is creating a situation where people feel disconnected from the political process and from their government, and that is a bad thing. That's why I'm considering running for president. But yes, it takes all these things. Technology could be, has been helpful. It takes manpower, but we know how to do this. We just need to do it.
What is your goal vis-a-vis ISIS? Is your goal to quash them? Is your goal to keep the U.S. safe? Is your goal something else?
ISIS is evil, and ISIS must be defeated. Period. Period. And of course they have to be defeated to keep us safe, but they also have to be defeated because we cannot permit a world in which evil people in 2015 go into villages and saw people's heads off just because they're Christians. I'm sorry, we cannot permit that. The good news is we don't have to fight this battle alone. And that's why I said there are all these things that we could be doing. that would help others fight this battle. So I gave many examples of what we could do, but I want to go back to Egypt for just a moment. Here's the new president of Egypt. He isn't perfect. Egypt isn't a perfect country, but Egypt has been an ally for a long time. And this president, al-Sisi, a pious Muslim, is putting his own life in jeopardy by saying the things he is saying and by doing the things he is doing. He puts his life in jeopardy when he starts bombing in retaliation for the beheading of Christians. He puts his life in jeopardy when he goes to the heart of Cairo and speaks to imams. And he needs support from us. If you've ever seen interviews with this man, he is begging for our support. Not for us to put boots on the ground in his country. He doesn't want that. He knows it wouldn't help. But how about sharing a little intelligence so he knows where to send his resources? And how about standing up and supporting his courageous stand instead of a mealy-mouthed comment about we can neither condemn nor condone? How do you
balance that against setback in democratization?
Yes, there have been many setbacks to democratization. I think it's clearly true. But honestly, I think we have more influence over how countries develop if we are prepared to stand with those who are threatened. So of course those conversations should continue in Egypt. But we didn't help the situation by cutting and running from Mubarak so quickly. We didn't help the situation by embracing the Muslim Brotherhood so quickly. We didn't help the situation by saying, on the one hand, Mrs. Clinton saying that Bashar al-Assad is a positive reformer, and now, many years later, we're finally getting around to talking about arming moderate rebels in Syria. We don't help ourselves when we are not clear-eyed and realistic, and we don't help advance our principles in nations like Egypt.
We're almost out of time. I just want to, do we have to, one more? Okay. This is a overarching one from the audience. Again, no name on this. Will it be possible to regain America's stature in the world during the next presidential term? And how do you want it? I think you've laid out some of the how, but how quickly can it happen?
Yes, absolutely is possible. Because everything I've talked about, everything we've talked about here, is totally within our control. We are masters of our own destiny. And that is why it is so tragic to me when we have an administration that wants to suggest that, there's nothing we can do. There's so many things we can do that are not about rushing foolishly into a war or spending decades trying to build nations where a central government has never existed, such as in Afghanistan. Yes, we can restore this. And I truly believe that there are some very clear signals that could be sent very quickly. I was asked an interesting question the other day at a dinner in Portsmouth. I was asked a very interesting question by someone. They said, what are the first 3 phone calls you would make if you were in the Oval Office? And here's how I answered that question, because I think it's responsive to this person's question. The first call I would make is to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. Because I want him to tell the world that the President of the United States has called him to reaffirm the strength of our friendship, because that will send a message to all our other friends as well. The second phone call I would make is to the Supreme Leader of Iran. And I would say, whatever the situation has been up till now, there's a new situation. We're going to enact punishing financial sanctions, and we're not going to lift the pressure until you agree to the inspections that the UN unanimously called for. And the third phone call that I would make is to the head of the Democratic Party. And I would say to the head of the Democratic Party, we have real work to do. We have real work to do. We have real problems to solve. We have real leadership to display in this nation and around the world. And I think every single one of those things are a signal that the world and the American people will understand.
need more time because we couldn't cover all of the questions that were asked. But I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. I think that these forums are really important. It's a subject that is so critical for us, our kids, and our grandchildren. And I'd like to take a few moments to thank some of the people that made this event a success. First is Mike Hickey and your staff, Sarah Jacobs and Julie Demers. Thank you for pulling this together. I'd like to thank the APS team, Darwin Cusack and John Miller. And a special thanks to T-Bone Specialty Market and Catering for providing this lunch today. Now, if those of you that parked in the garage need to have your parking tickets stamped, you can do that at the security desk on your way out. And I would just like to close by thanking all of you for joining us today. Hope to see you at the next forum, and have a great afternoon.